Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hey everyone, and welcome to All Together, the Family Science Insights podcast, produced by MSW, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element, with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Dina Sargent. Let's get started.
Hello and welcome back to the show. I'm Marie, your host for today. For some, children leaving home highlights the distance traveled in the parenting journey. And for others, it is the hour of renewal and rediscovery of themselves detached from parenthood. And in many cases, it's both. While this transition can be bittersweet, it also presents unique opportunities for personal growth and reflection. So, in this episode, we'll be exploring the emotional and practical aspects of navigating the empty nest transition. But beyond that, we'll also be looking at the second empty nest transition, which is, as our guest for today puts it, a recurrence of the empty nest syndrome when grandmother's intensive involvement in their grandchildren's care decreases significantly or ceases altogether. And joining us on this discussion is social worker Yarin Cohen, who is also a PhD student at the University of South Carolina's College of Social Work. And prior to this, Yarin earned his bachelor and master degrees of social work from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, where he examined the lives of grandmothers whose intensive caregiving role has ended. This led him to introduce the term the second empty nest, shedding light on such emotional journeys. So welcome, Yarin. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Marie, for having me.
Yeah, I'm really keen to get this discussion going. But before we begin, tell us a bit about what you found in your master's thesis and what you're currently researching.
Well, like you mentioned, in my master's thesis, I focused on the lived experiences of grandmothers as they either decrease or end their care for grandchildren. And that can happen for several reasons. And I think it kind of sheds light on something that's not really discussed. This whole phenomenon of what happens to grandmothers the day after when they're either no longer able or no longer needed to take care of their grandchildren. So I think I phrase that as the second empty nest. Of course, this is a lot more complicated, and we'll discuss it soon.
That's incredible. It's definitely an unspoken experience. Like it's not talked about as much for sure. So that's great that you were looking into it. And what are you currently working on?
So at the College of Social Work, there are two main projects that I'm working on right now. The first one, I'm working with Dr. Robert Hawk and his team on the experiences of aging caregivers of adults with autism, which is also interestingly connected to the empty nest in a way, because here we have a case of people who are getting older. However, their children, sometimes with special needs and high support needs, do not leave the home and they stay at home. So that's one project. The other one is a project that I'm doing. I'm researching Holocaust survivors in Israel in the context of the current war. I'm trying to learn about their narratives and how they're coping with the current situation.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So out of all of this, what have you found to be the most common misconceptions about the empty nest transition?
I think if we look at it historically, the idea is, I think when you say this, the empty nest syndrome, there's this idea that the children leave the home and then mothers get depressed, or there's some kind of loss of meaning and some kind of a crisis, which I think originally this is how the emptiness was concepted. However, that is for a very long time. This is not the case right now. When you talk about the syndrome, it sounds very negative. I think today we talk more about emptiness transition or emptiness experience, and some have even changed this wording of emptiness.
Yeah, well, that's really fascinating. And I would love to go further into detail about this. But before we do that, I would also love to get to know you better. So, this is Have You Met Yarin? And my first question for you is, what do you like to do in your spare time?
Well, that is a very easy question for me. I have a son who is 8 years old, and definitely my favorite thing to do is spending time with him. I love going outside. I love watching him grow and develop, running on the beach, playing in sand, um, or even just be at home. Definitely the highlight.
Yeah, that's really sweet. Are there any favorite activities that you have, or are there any activities that you enjoy in particular doing with your son?
Well, he is a very young wrestling fan, so I do like to share that with him. But I also have hobbies of myself. Like I do like to go outside and be in the outdoors. I think this is something I didn't get to do so much in the United States, although South Carolina does offer great opportunities for that.
Yeah, what kind of scape do you prefer? Like a forest kind of scenery or beach?
There was a time that I got to do some backpacking in New Zealand,
Mhm,
and I think the variety of scapes there was incredible.
mhm,
I I particularly like mountainy areas,
mhm.
and just being climbing up is very difficult, but it's worth it in the end. So
Yeah, I've heard that New Zealand is beautiful and it's so close by to where we are that it's actually quite appalling that I haven't given it a visit yet. But I actually will be doing that next year, I believe. So, do you have any recommendations for me?
um, the great thing about New Zealand is really everywhere you go is so beautiful.
Yeah.
I think the area, I think Tongariro is was
Mhm.
probably my favorite area. That's if you ever watched Lord of the Rings, that's where Mordor is.
Yeah.
So a very very unique place. Kind of feels like you're walking on Mars, or
Yeah,
so.
oh, like I've seen pictures and videos of it, and it just seems like a whole different universe. Which, yeah, and I think that's a general consensus that New Zealand is just beautiful every like every which way you go. So that's really exciting. And is there anywhere? Well, you seem to have traveled quite a bit, so are there any places in particular that you have really enjoyed visiting and will want to return again?
Well, I believe the correct answer would be Australia, um,
You get
which I
bonus points for
definitely.
that. Yeah.
But I was also recommend Vietnam to be
Mm,
a very it's a very safe country, and the people and the food are just everything is just wonderful, and it's highly recommended.
yeah, the food is amazing. Not that I've been, but we do have some Vietnamese cuisine in Australia that's fairly accessible, and I am just all over it. Incidentally, I'm actually going to Vietnam next year as well. So, like what Vietnam is pretty big. There are various different spots, not different spots, but like different cities and towns with their own unique cuisine. Has there been any city in particular that has stood out to you for whatever reason?
Well, I really like the area of Hoi An just
Hmm.
because there's so many tailors there, and you
Yeah,
can kind of make your own clothes
yeah,
however you'd like them. So that
yeah,
was pretty cool.
yeah. That's really nice to hear. So, apart from traveling, going outside, and spending time with your son, do you happen to watch films or TV shows at all?
I do watch a lot of Uh, Not so much, but I like to fall asleep with The Office. Definitely my favorite end of the day, clean my head show.
Yeah, it's always good to have a like cleansing your brain kind of show just on hand. I feel like it's great to have one just for whenever I'm cooking because sometimes I can spend like 1 or 2 wait 3 hours maybe cooking and just having that there to um, keep me a little bit busy, but not too busy, is really helpful as well. So, yeah, that's really nice to know. And my last question for you is who do you look up to either in your professional life or your personal life?
In my professional life, I would have to say my former mentor. When I was at the Hebrew University, there was Dr. Gabriela Spector-Melzen, and I got to work with her, and I think she had huge influence on my life and the things I chose to do. I wasn't headed towards research. I was very in practice. I wanted to do social work practice and work with people, and I think she kind of got the bug of research in my head, and she's the one that taught me a lot about narratives and meaning making and how we form identities and all these issues that really help me both in research and help me as well as a social worker in the field.
Wow, that's amazing. So, what would you say are the biggest lessons that you've learned from her?
I would say just how important is the story that we tell ourselves about the world, about ourselves, and the way we think. Everything is kind of in the form of stories.
Yeah.
And it really helped me understand myself better, but also when I talk to clients, and especially I think when you're working with aging population,
Mhm,
where they don't have the same possibilities that they had in the past of making meaning,
mhm.
then this form of narrative and being able to reshape your story is very important. Is a very important tool as a professional.
Yeah. Well, that's a really interesting lesson. Thank you so much for sharing that. I feel like I got to know you a bit better as a person. So I feel like this would be a great place to jump right into the interview. And my first question for you is what do you think a family is?
Well, that is a very, I would say right now, the definition of a family would be very flexible. And I think very different from the traditional view we had in the past. Now we see, um, we see a lot of uh, new kinds of family. We see divorce, we see same sex marriages. Um, we even see co-parenting now. There are all types of families. I think if I had to define what a family is, I would define it more in terms of what a family gives you. Does it give you the support you need, the space for emotional growth, for growing as a human being? And I
Mhm.
think that, uh, like right now, the term of family is so diverse that I don't think you can put it all under one roof. Unless you kind of think about how important family is to us.
Yeah, 100%. And in terms of structure and importance, how do you think family in society today compares to decades ago?
Well, I think first of all, it can take a completely different shape. Right now, I'm in the United States. I'm far away from most of my family. It doesn't change the fact that we are a family. And right now, the ability to just reach someone on the other side of the world in an instant is definitely it gives more opportunities to maintain this family relationship.
Yeah, I think that ties quite nicely into the empty nest transition topic for today as well, because the empty nest transition a few decades ago wouldn't have been as it wouldn't have been well, there would have been a lot more emotional distress, I imagine, just because of the technological means in the past versus now, where you'd be able to keep in touch with your children more regularly. But before we get into that, how would you define the empty nest transition?
Well, we can look at it from few different definitions across history. Historically, the simple definition is when the last child leaves the home, um, and of course, we know right now that's not the reality for most people, or at least for a lot of the people. We see what we call maybe the revolving door. We see children leave the house and return to the house, and um, there's no once it's not like in the past, maybe when a child would leave and that will be it. So we have in Australian terms what we call the boomerang generation. Children go and come back, and yeah, I would say that things are very different. I would define it right now definitely more. Another way to phrase it is open door, um, meaning there's freedom to come and go. It's more flexible.
Mm-hmm.
It less focuses on loss,
Mm-hmm.
because right now I would say I see a lot of mothers or parents in that phase that see more opportunity and time and positive aspects of this phase. But in
Yeah.
general terms, we're talking about children leaving the home and the parents kind of having to cope or re-strategize around this leaving of the nest.
So, what is the importance of addressing the empty nest transition? What effect does it have on families?
So we have to remember that the empty nest uh, could lead to some feelings of uh, maybe some identity confusion for some parents. Their role is now changed. Uh, and I think especially for very involved parents,
Mm.
this role of a parent is more, especially I would say for mothers that have stayed at home and took care of their children. This is what we call a transparent role, or a transparent career. It is something that you don't get paid for, and it is done at home. People don't see it, and there's no awards for mothers for being a great mother, or they don't get raises.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important to kind of have, when you shed a light on something like this, when you talk about this, when you acknowledge the fact that that this could happen, it could be very meaningful for parents.
Yeah, 100%. I 100% agree with you there. I feel like there is very little recognition that goes to mothers who stay at home and raise the kids. And I know that speaking from somebody who didn't take took it for granted when I was younger. And looking back, it's like my mom did so much for me, and she really got to have her emotions acknowledged or addressed. And it is great to have that acknowledged in some way. So apart from um the identity change that might be going on, what are some other common emotions that parents or mothers often face during this transition?
Well, I would say some of them would feel, or some will show some aspect of feeling confused and not sure what to do next, especially if your identity is really built on rearing children. Some might feel sense of relief and happiness that we have to remember that the empty nest, first and foremost, in the Western world, is a normative phenomenon. It is a something that we want to happen, right? If a child leaves home, that means you've done well as a parent, at least in Western society.
Yeah.
So it's something. It's definitely something to celebrate, and it's time that could be for new beginnings and working on your marriage or finding other things that you can do. But it's also about relinquishing some kind of control or whatever connection you had with the child that might be now in a different place.
So, from what you found, what can parents do to prepare themselves emotionally and mentally for the empty nest transition?
Okay, so this I should mention also that in a way it's called the emptiness. It could really bring this sense of emptiness or purposefulness and this kind of loss of meaning. So the first thing I believe parents can practice is reflect, because there's no answer that encompasses everything. So first I would say you need to really have a conversation with yourself in a way and figure out what did you lose really, like what happened, like what is happening right now if the children are leaving, because you're as a parent, you're a provider of their emotional support and basic needs, and the children need you, and you kind of teach them about the world, and it's also a tool of being a part of society, and some parents are very involved in the school system, and so if you think about yourself, about your call it self-efficacy, like the things that you're good at, the things that you gave your children, the things that you want to continue doing, then maybe you can find what will give you a sense of coherence, something that will kind of continue what you were doing in a different way. So if what you're losing, say, some fathers report that they lose kind of their protective roles of their children, then they can go and maybe volunteer to be protected somewhere else, on other kids, or if it's a mother that's very involved in the school, she can maybe find some other ways to get involved in different places, like kind of maintain that the same thing that you used to get from being a parent.
Yeah, for sure. And just because your children have left home doesn't mean you stop being a parent. You can still be a parent for them. They aren't living in the same quarters as you anymore. So, in terms of keeping in touch with children, what are some effective ways for parents to maintain that bond?
Well, there are several ways, and it really depends on the situation. If we're talking about a child that has moved far away and it's not realistic to see them and very, very soon, so it's best to kind of build some kind of a schedule, some kind of a communication system, and that works in a way that you can actually either know a time when you talk or talk about specific issues, and make sure that you keep in touch with them, and also remember like the things that you can give them as a parent that nobody else can, like this unconditional love and levels of maybe empathy and acceptance, and sharing your life with them as well. Uh, so this is about long distance. Um, some ways of maintaining a connection, and of course, go visit them whenever you can.
Yeah, I can definitely attest to having a system set up as well. During COVID, my parents and I did something where, because they are Catholic, well, we're all like on paper Catholic, but that doesn't matter. Um, we had there was this online mass service that was going on where it was broadcasted and they would attend it every week, but I join in every couple of weeks to sit down with them and tune into the broadcast, and then we talk afterwards. And it was a nice way to kind of do something together instead of just talking, just FaceTiming and just talking. And it really helped to maintain that bond as well. So I can definitely attest to that. But for parent child relationships that are more in close proximity, what kind of activities or practices would you recommend?
So I think the example you just gave is fantastic because it leads me to the next point, which is joint activities. I think sometimes there's this expectation, maybe that children will call and we'll just talk, and there's a limit to how much you can talk to the same person day after day.
Hmm.
So definitely finding some kind of activities that you can do together. It could be around specific interests, about things that you can. It could be board games or going fishing or going hiking, whatever things that you are capable of doing and want to do together.
Yeah.
Um, Another way that I've seen parents maintain touch with their children is just becoming kind of a center in terms of family dinners
Hmm.
or family events,
Hmm.
where the whole family. This is definitely standard procedure in Israel, at least, where Friday night you're with your family,
Hmm.
and so every other Friday night everyone is coming to the
Hmm.
parents' home, and this is very normal, and it assures that you will at least see them in that time period.
Yeah, it's kind of like not, I wouldn't put it as mindless, but more of like it's already there and the system is there, so you don't have to think so much about actively maintaining that bond. You just kind of go to that Friday night dinner and you catch up there, which is just really nice to have. But I also think of one of my friends who he just celebrated his 30th birthday and he celebrated it at his parents' house again because they have a bigger backyard, and every year he does that, and every single year his mom goes, "This is the last time you're celebrating your birthday at my house. You're an adult now, you use your own house," but every single year it happens again at their house, which is really funny. But I think it's illustrative of that maintenance of that parent child bond where child moves out, there's then adult, but doesn't mean that the bond is going to dissipate at all, and there's several things that you can do to maintain that. So yeah, but what are your thoughts on that?
First of all, I didn't say that it's a perfect solution, um, but yeah, absolutely. I don't think the bond needs to change. I think right now I'm in the United States,
Mhm,
and it's very common for children to go to college
mhm,
for a while, and you can see the students here how they're connected still to their parents, how they're still very meaningful in their support, and
mhm,
how strong their bonds are.
mhm.
And yeah, I think that their parents are still playing a major role in their life, even though they're not living at home anymore.
And specifically with the second empty nest, I imagine that it entails more unique challenges. So would you mind giving us a brief explanation as to what it is, who is affected by it?
Yes. So the second emptiness really talks about, like I mentioned earlier, the cessation of grandchildren childcare of grandmothers, and right now we see this. Um, right now, more and more parents are involved in working as both parents work, and we see that people live longer. And people also reach very late ages, and a lot of them are still healthy and and can take care of their grandchildren. And let's face it, childcare can be very expensive, depending on where you are. Like all these reasons make grandparents right now worldwide are the number one um, informal childcare solution. So
I like the way you put it.
so so that leads to a lot of and usually still, especially when we talk about the older generation, the expectation of taking care of a grandchild is still on the grandmother more than the grandfather. Grandfathers, I'm not saying I've seen a lot of grandfathers that are very involved, so I don't want to generalize, but definitely in terms of society and the expected roles, you see a lot more grandmothers who are involved with their grandchildren. And what happens is at some point, this now this gives they do it for several reasons. Like they want to support their children. A lot of them can support them financially, but they do want to help them. I remember one of the women I interviewed, was really proud because of her caregiving, their children were able to buy their own home. They were able to go to work and be quiet. You know that their children are with the grandmother, someone they trust, someone they know is good with children.
Yeah.
So it gives them like this peace of mind. Another reason is sometimes during crisis, like a divorce or maybe a disease of one of the parents that they're dealing with right now. So I should say at this point that when I talk about being involved with grandchildren, not all grandparents are interested.
Yeah.
Some of kind of feel like they have to. Then and I have talked to grandparents who are not happy about it. But I would say most of them definitely did not regret it and felt like this is something that they want to do. And for a lot of the grandmothers that I interviewed, it just being around children, this is their thing. This is something that they love doing, something that they're good at, and they're kind of able to. They define it. So some of the participants define it as a second motherhood, like being a mother a second time around, and they describe this feeling of being younger and being suddenly able to, like, they felt like they're 30 years old, even though they were a lot older.
Yeah.
And I would say also that this is a very different, being a grandparent is a lot more fun. You don't have to run around and go to work and come back and do all these other things. You generally just have the grandchildren. And sometimes you even reach it in a point in life where you can afford more than you could with your children, and you can really spoil the grandchildren to maybe not so happy parents about it, but but the grandparents are fine.
Yeah.
So at some point, this could end. This could happen because the grandmother gets older, and she's not able to take care of the grandchild anymore. It could be because of some crisis in the family, and because that the child gets old enough and he doesn't need a grandmother anymore, and he can go home by himself and make his own meal. And so at that point, what has been described is really, I've heard about a sense of loss and emptiness and void of being, because we're talking, when I defined intensity as 3 times a week for 2 hours or more for a period of 2 years. And I was way off. It was so intense. For some of them, it was full days, and including summer, and every minute that the children were not in school, they were with the grandmothers until the late evening.
Yeah.
So going from that to suddenly not having the child around can really be a crisis.
Yeah. Yeah, and I imagine even if a grandparent hasn't exactly or didn't exactly want to take care of the child, it doesn't negate the bond that they have built with the child, right? So, but what challenges are unique to the second nest transition? What do we see in the second nest transition that's more specific to it?
Well, the most I would say the most obvious difference is the age and the time of life when this happens.
Mhm,
When children leave home, a mother is still usually at an age where she can work, and they usually still do. She can find new hobbies, new meaning, kind of redefine yourself, and you can even go and turn to taking care of your grandchildren.
mhm, mhm,
Like there's all these options, all this hope for something better or something else or
mhm,
something that can kind of help you maintain yourself.
mhm,
And for grandmothers, that often not the case.
mhm,
When they when the last grandchild grows up, or when they're
mhm,
not capable of taking care of their grandchildren,
mhm,
they kind of stay with it. There's nothing in the horizon. It's a lot if you're physically not able
mhm,
to um, to find something else that you can do. If you have to stay at home, if you um, like, there's all these challenges, and that it might be a little harder to find new meaning.
So, how does the second empty nest transition affect the relationship between grandparents and their grandchildren?
Well, first, I would say being an involved grandmother in raising your grandchildren, uh, it keeps that bond that you mentioned earlier. It's definitely, we see that they mentioned the grandchildren that they were closer to, that they spent more time with, as the one they're close, they still feel the closest to, even after they left. And you see the sense of pride of uh, of the success of their grandchildren. And meaning that if a person is doing well, or got a really good job, or got accepted to this program, I have it. I have a part of it because really they grew up here and
Mhm,
not just with the parents, which is another thing that's not always acknowledged, right? If someone is successful, maybe they'll talk about it with the parents, but not always. The grandmother is kind of in the back, maybe.
mhm,
Um, I would say I heard a lot of the disappointment.
mhm,
I remember one grandmother that described it very well. She said, um, I raised them, but now they're adolescents. They don't come, they don't call, they don't visit. And what is wrong with them? I used to change their diaper,
mhm,
and you can really see this feeling of maybe um, that the grandchildren are just not there anymore, and
mhm,
this is also happens usually at an age where
mhm,
the grandchildren, the grandmothers described around age
mhm,
12, 13.
mhm,
That's an age where you want to be around your peers, where you
mhm,
want to go and find your independence, and not
mhm,
be with your
mhm.
grandparent now.
Yeah.
So, I think there was definitely some um, feeling of maybe ungratefulness, but
Yeah.
also closeness, and I would say a lot more anger was expressed towards the children and
Mhm.
not the grandchildren.
Oh,
Because
that's interesting.
when you take care of the grandchildren, and
Mhm,
obviously it brings the children closer.
mhm,
That's another way of maintaining connection with the children.
mhm,
But at some point, when the children didn't need the grandmothers anymore, some showed really appreciation of, look at what you've done and all the help you gave us.
mhm,
But some describe the children just kind of disappearing,
mhm.
and we don't need you anymore, so we're not going to talk to you a lot.
Yeah, and I think it's really unfortunate as well because from what I've seen, or at least from what I've experienced as well, grandparents tend to be an afterthought, despite having put hours and hours, or like, well, I used to go to my grandparents' house every single day after school, and so I'd spend basically at least half of my time, if not more, under my grandparents' care or my grandmother's care, and yet, as an adolescent, when I was a teenager, all I thought was all I thought was about school and how I was perceived in school and everything else but my grandparents, which is really unfortunate. But I think that's I guess part of life, but it's still all the more a very difficult time to go through as a grandparent who's experiencing this, right? So what do you think grandparents can do to maintain that close connection, or do you think that there's a need to maintain that close connection with their grandchildren, or yeah, what do you think they should do in this case?
Well, it really depends. Um, do they need that connection? Absolutely, they would want it. I mean, it's always good to be around your grandchildren. I know for most grandparents that I know, their grandchildren are like the most important thing in their life. Um, I would say it's very similar to children. This is something that you kind of have to get creative about if you want your grandchildren to be around you. And I know if there are any grandmothers listening, and I'm not sure they're gonna like it when they usually don't when I say it, but you need to show
Mhm,
initiative,
mhm,
and think
mhm,
how can I like there's this sometimes this expectations in the
mhm,
grandchildren. I did all this for them. Now they should be calling me and making sure that I'm fine. And on the other hand, is what you described is the most natural thing. This is what children think about when they're
mhm,
they're that age. So creating any kind of activity
mhm,
that is more of their world of content,
mhm,
something that you can do with them that is
mhm,
within the limits of what you can do.
mhm.
I remember I saw a video of even grandparents that play like video games with their grandchildren, or it takes effort and kind of out of the box thinking.
Yeah.
But if you kind of reflect and think, what can I do? How can I create some kind of space where we can be together and not just talk, or not just be together as this expectation of them being around me?
Mhm.
I think that will be very helpful.
Yeah.
And I would add also, well, sometimes it could be that the grandchildren are far,
Mhm,
or it could be that they just really are not in a phase that they want to be around the grandparents.
mhm,
In that case, I would definitely it's very similar to parents. Again, you need to find what is missing for you. What have you lost when the grandchildren, when you stop taking care of them?
mhm,
And you need to make sure there's some kind of coherence, some kind of continuity of what you were doing before. And there are a lot of things you can do for the grandchildren that don't involve being around the grandchildren.
mhm,
For example, writing your family history or
mhm,
your personal history.
mhm,
And I know for a lot of maybe someone listening to that will say, well, they're not interested in my history. Well, they're not interested now,
mhm. Yeah,
but
100%.
one day they will be. And you taking the time to think about, uh, taking the time to make sure that when they reach that point, they will have something to look at and know where they came from and know more about you. That can be a very powerful gift.
Yeah, I really like that. That is something I for sure would have been not very interested by as a teenager, but as an adult, very, very intrigued by it. And I think also it just made me think of another point there where with grandparents, a lot of the time, grandchildren are so used to being cared for by their grandparents that they kind of think that it's normal to receive this, and they don't perceive the hard work and the affection and the love that they're being given by the grandparents as hard work and anything other. Yeah, they just kind of see it as natural, like normal family stuff, which is a very privileged standpoint, obviously. But it is the cycle that it is what, the process of how adolescents perceive things to growing up and becoming an adult, and then gaining your independence, and then realizing that you had that privilege before and you had that connection before, and then revisiting, right? So I think now is actually a good time to go into practices and habits for navigating the empty nest transition. So what are your recommended practices for individuals or families to go through this phase of life?
Well, I mentioned the importance of reflection and thinking with yourself about what it is that you actually need. And I think that can be very challenging for a lot of parents and grandparents because it means that maybe for some, for the first time, they're going to put their own needs as what's going to guide them for what to do next,
Yeah.
and not the child or the grandchild. So I would say you can kind of build your own resiliency, or at least um, put yourself in a situation that kind of fosters resiliency.
Mm-hmm.
And this could be a very good time to work on your marriage. A lot of couples report that this is a time where they either blossom or but it is definitely a time to work on that. Um, it is a time to really strengthen your friends, your social connections. You're definitely going to need them later on.
Mm-hmm.
And these kind of things really can really help you build some support system. It could be a good time for community. Um, if there are people who are more spiritual, and that can go in the sense of faith, but also religion can build you like a sense of community and be around people. Uh, and yeah, I say take this time to kind of work on yourself, work on your wellness. You can get some healthy habits, and like the one thing you get when your nest empties is more time. And so definitely I would say this is a time for like reinventing yourself, find something else, find a new hobby, then things you've never experienced, things that, especially for parents with how hectic life can be, this is a good opportunity to try things that you never had the time or when you were having your children at home.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that with us, Yarin. Now, let's move on to the open mic section. This is your chance to talk about anything that you're passionate about, and it doesn't have to be related to the topic. So the floor is entirely yours. Please take it away.
Thank you. Well, I think I mentioned my mentor earlier, and I think I would kind of like to talk about how being in her course, and it was narrative gerontology. Now, I went into that course because I was excited to see a course about gerontology. They don't offer that much in social work, as most social workers are not excited to work in that field. But I kind of walked in for the gerontology and stayed for the narrative, like this whole idea of meaning making and identity. And at the time, I was also working with Holocaust survivors, and I also ran into the work of Viktor Frankl, Man's Search of Meaning, and the way he managed to survive the camps and still, by using this sense of meaning and having something to live for. And that fascinated me because this is something that I've been asking myself, are just the Holocaust survivors that I work with are so strong. They're so resilient. I see them go through, even at old age, terrible situations, but they still manage to maintain this sense of resiliency. So that really led me into this this journey of what makes a person resilient. And I did find uh, some information on the subject. I'm currently doing also a systematic review on resiliency among genocide survivors. Like I find this how people move on from a catastrophe is fascinating. Like how, despite a very traumatic circumstances, you can kind of re-find yourself. And so here are some things that foster resiliency, and I think that can kind of help even empty nesters wherever they are. So first, there's this concept of hardiness, and that means again having a sense of purpose, purposefulness, meaningful life, and that especially with people who've been through trauma. You would see a lot of them turn this trauma into something meaningful. Someone who's been in a car accident will go and advocate again for preventing car accidents, or someone who's been through some kind of injustice will go and advocate for other people who are suffering injustice, taking your story, taking the bad thing that may have happened to you, and turning it into something positive. So that's commitment. And then something that I would hear a lot from older adults, and this is something that I really enjoy their wisdom, and is don't worry about what you can change. And this kind of approach, control, is control, like being able to just separate what you can and cannot control and focus in on what you can. And the third one would be challenge, just enjoying challenges, like not looking at it as something negative, but as something that enables growth. Social support is another thing that really fosters resiliency. Like I've mentioned, like it's very important to be able to bounce back from trauma, and that goes back to also community, especially in non-Western trauma survivors. You see that the sense of community is very important. When in Western society, you see a more an individualistic kind of coping approach. Yeah, and I think when you go back to meaning, a lot of survivors kind of make a point of telling their story, making sure that everybody knows what happened, telling the stories of those who can, people who didn't survive. And that kind of gives them this sense of what happened. I have a role, something happened, and I'm here to tell about it. So another thing that I found was the older adults' secrets. Like, how do older adults maintain resiliency? And it seems they have found a very interesting solution of not getting into arguments and not being around people that are not good for you, which is something that I think you kind of get the courage to do only later in life. It seems to be around people that are have a positive influence to you, not getting into things arguments or conversation that you know are going to affect your mood. And that seems to be from the literature I read, this is something that older adults know how to do better.
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty accurate. As someone who has learned to slowly just avoid getting into arguments and surround myself with people who won't perturb me as I get older. Because looking back as a teenager, I would basically surround myself with anyone who would be willing to be around me, and that didn't really do wonders for my mood or or anxiety at all. So yeah, I'd say that's pretty accurate, and also to the point of turning trauma into something meaningful. It is pretty amazing what meaning can do for somebody in life. So thank you so much, Yarin, for sharing that with us. That was an excellent use of the open mic. And if our listeners want to find out more about you and what you do, where can they go?
Well, they can reach out via. First, you can find me on ResearchGate. I think that's the only social media platform I'm available on. But you can also, I'm always happy to receive an email if someone wants to reach out and ask a question or make any kind of contact.
Amazing. We'll link those in the show notes. We really appreciate you coming on to the show today, Yarin. So thank you for that once again. And thank you everybody for tuning in. And we will catch you in the next episode.
You've been listening to All Together, the Family Science Insights podcast, produced by the Family Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it so that we can grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at fa.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Dina Sargent. Thanks for tuning in.